A sitting FBI director personally trading stocks while overseeing investigations that could impact those very markets? That's exactly what Congressman Joe Neguse exposed when he cornered Kash Patel about his semiconductor investments made just months before taking the helm of America's top law enforcement agency. What you're about to see reveals how ethics rules meant to prevent conflicts of interest have become suggestions that powerful officials can simply navigate around.
Gentleman yielding. With that, we now recognize the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. Thank you, Director Patel, for being here today. I have a couple of questions regarding a terrible shooting that occurred in Colorado, which is a state, as you may know, that I represent. You've testified previously about, I think, what you would describe as your efforts to provide more information regarding the investigation with respect to the horrific assassination of Mr. Kirk. And so, in that same vein, I'm hoping you can provide this committee and my constituents in Colorado with some clarity.
Absolutely.
I think, as my colleagues know, in Evergreen, Colorado, Jefferson County, a county that I proudly represent, at Evergreen High School, a shooter ultimately injured. 2 students were praying for their swift recovery. There's an article here from Colorado Public Radio. The title is, quote, FBI was already investigating an account that may have been linked to the Evergreen shooter. You're familiar with the circumstances generally, Director, regarding this terrible tragedy.
Yes.
So my understanding from the public reporting is that an organization reported to the FBI in July of this year regarding, just reading here from the article, that the FBI opened an assessment into a social media account user whose identity was unknown and who was discussing the planning of a mass shooting with threats nonspecific in nature. This is the FBI's statement to the press. And that the FBI continued to work this assessment investigation to identify the name and location of the user up until September 10th, 2025, which was the day of the tragedy. Can you provide us some clarity on what were the impediments to finding, the account user, and maybe describe in greater detail the FBI's work in that regard?
Generally speaking, yes, because I know even though the shooter's deceased, the investigation we're not done.
Sure.
And so the impediments to finding these individuals, and you highlight a great point. We had 2 huge tragedies in the span of days in this country. The school shooting in Evergreen, Colorado being one of them. And proactively going out onto these social media platforms, which are so large, is our biggest impediment. And we need to rely on the service providers. There's actual legislation, I can't remember the name of it, that's up for renewal, which will, and I think at the end of the month, which gives service providers the ability to report that information in from their end without liability. We need that to continue, because while the FBI has so many people and the police are great at doing it, there's just too many platforms to cover down on.
Well, I appreciate that, Director Patel, and I think we're certainly, I'm interested in continuing this conversation, because I think the reporting suggests that there's a pattern, and that ultimately, we want to make sure that law enforcement is able to prevent this kind of tragedy from happening in the future. I have a question. It's not meant as a gotcha question, so it just frame it there. But it is in regards to some reporting around a periodic transaction report that you had filed earlier, this year. So this is in July, pursuant to the ethical obligations as a senior executive official. You remember filing that in July?
Yes.
Yeah. So in that report, as best as I can surmise, you disclosed that you divested $100,000 or more in a variety of different stocks, right, which I presume was pursuant to the ethics agreement that you negotiated with the Department of Justice. In that same report, there's a disclosure regarding purchases of 2 different transactions. So between $15,000 to $50,000 in a national coffee house chain, and between $50,000 to $100,000 in a semiconductor company on May 9th and May 12th. Are those transactions that you're doing personally, or are these through a stockbroker, or are these transactions that you're handling yourself?
So how they happen is I submit proposals under DOJ guidance to say, hey, I would like to trade this or that, and they run their review, and the FBI runs a review, and then they come back and say yes or no, and then I make the transaction.
Is there a reason that you decided to make the purchases into those 2 companies?
Generally speaking, before I got this job, I was, trading stocks, but not a lot, like most people, and I just follow certain industries, and I thought they would be a good investment.
So the reason why I ask, right, because you had divested in other companies.
Yeah.
And I presume that wasn't because there were actual conflicts. It's just that you wanted to avoid an appearance of impropriety.
It was both.
Both. But not all of the companies were conflicts.
Whatever they
you
make
divested
the,
from.
I don't make the call, they make the call.
Sure.
Yeah.
I guess my point would be, the reason why I ask is, why I said it's not a gotcha question, I have for years led an effort here in Congress to try to ban members of Congress, senior executive officials, from trading stocks. And it's bipartisan in nature. We're working really hard to get that done, Republicans and Democrats. And you can understand, I think, given your role, given the nature of the position that you hold as the leader of the largest law enforcement agency in our country, that divesting entirely, not doing day trading now, I think would be something that would be in the interest of the American people. So I just would hope you would consider that, and that moving forward, that perhaps not purchasing stocks in individual companies, I would think would be something that would be worth pursuing.
Gentleman's time is
I'm happy to give the witness an opportunity to answer.
Thank you. I'll work with you on it.
What Congressman Neguse did in that hearing room wasn't just ask about stock trades. He methodically exposed a fundamental problem with how we allow the nation's top law enforcement officials to navigate conflicts of interest. When the FBI director can personally profit from industries his agency regulates and investigates, we've moved far beyond the appearance of impropriety into actual structural corruption. Let's break down what happened and why it matters for every American who believes law enforcement should be independent and impartial. Patel disclosed purchasing between $50,000 and $100,000 in semiconductor stocks in May, just months before taking control of an agency that regularly investigates corporate fraud, antitrust violations, and national security threats in the tech sector. When Neguse pressed him on the decision-making process, Patel's answer revealed a system designed to provide cover rather than prevent conflicts. The approval process, Patel described, sounds rigorous on paper. Submit proposals to DOJ ethics officials, get FBI review, wait for yes or no. But that process fundamentally misses the point. It assumes that as long as bureaucrats sign off, personal financial interests won't influence official decisions. That's not how human psychology works, and it's not how institutional corruption develops. When someone has tens of thousands of dollars riding on semiconductor stock performance, every decision about tech investigations carries personal stakes. Consider the practical implications. The FBI routinely investigates price manipulation, insider trading, and corporate malfeasance in the semiconductor industry. They handle national security cases involving chip technology and foreign interference. When the director personally profits from that sector's success, how can agents and prosecutors be certain their cases will be evaluated purely on evidence? How can the public trust that enforcement priorities aren't influenced by the director's portfolio? Neguse highlighted an even more troubling pattern. Patel divested from some companies due to conflicts, but simultaneously purchased others in related industries. This suggests a calculated approach to ethics compliance rather than genuine commitment to avoiding conflicts. He's not stepping away from personal financial interests that could influence his judgment. He's managing them within legal boundaries while maintaining profit opportunities. The congressman's reference to broader congressional efforts to ban stock trading by senior officials puts this in proper context. This isn't about Patel personally, it's about a system that allows public servants to treat their positions as investment opportunities. When members of Congress trade stocks based on information from committee hearings, that's corruption. When FBI directors trade in sectors they regulate, that's the same principle at work. Patel's response that he would work with Neguse on potential reforms was telling. It wasn't a commitment to stop trading. It wasn't recognition that his position requires complete separation from personal financial interests in regulated industries. It was a polite deflection that preserves his current arrangement while appearing cooperative. The broader context makes this more concerning. Under previous administrations, FBI directors typically placed assets in blind trusts or index funds specifically to avoid any appearance of personal financial interest in their official decisions. Patel's approach represents a departure from that norm, suggesting that ethical standards are viewed as obstacles to navigate rather than principles to uphold. What should alarm every American is how normalized this has become. We've moved from expecting public servants to avoid conflicts of interest to accepting that they'll manage them through bureaucratic processes. That shift fundamentally changes the relationship between public service and personal enrichment. When the FBI director can personally profit from industries his agency oversees, we've created incentives that undermine the entire premise of impartial law enforcement. The solution Neguse outlined isn't complicated. Complete divestiture from individual stocks. Investment only in broad market funds that don't create sector-specific interests. Clear rules that prioritize public service over personal profit. These aren't radical proposals. They're basic ethical standards that most Americans would assume already exist. This hearing moment crystallized a choice the country faces about institutional integrity. We can accept that senior officials will continue mixing personal financial interests with public duties, or we can demand the kind of ethical standards that democracy requires. Neguse's questions weren't gotcha politics. They were civic accountability in action, exactly what congressional oversight should accomplish.